Hello, everyone. My name is Iman Lakhani, and I'm the Communications Officer for the Center for Excellence in Journalism. CJ specializes in providing professional development trainings for journalists in Pakistan. Over the years, we've trained over 2,000 journalists from across the country, doing both in-person trainings and online trainings. Some of the topics that we've done include digital entrepreneurship, humanitarian reporting, investigative reporting, peace reporting, and along with social media trainings and others. And CJ also offers mentoring and fellowship programs. This discussion is organized in partnership with the Global Investigative Journalism Network, and the session will be moderated by Amil Ghani, who I'll just pass on to introduce everyone else.
Okay, great. Thanks, Iman. So I'd just like to begin by introducing GIJN first. GIJN, or the Global Investigative Journalist Network, is an international network of journalists. Our main work is to provide free resources and trainings to journalists throughout the world. We publish in over 12 languages, and we work with journalists in over 100 countries across the world. Our work is available to journalists across the world free of cost, and they can also reach out to us in the form of queries or questions if they need help with like a specific issue or a specific topic. Today, what we're discussing specifically is funding investigative or independent journalism in South Asia, because we've seen censorship across South Asia worsen over the past few years across all indexes, and we've also seen that the mainstream media is really not kind of highlighting or doing the work it should be. So in an atmosphere like this where censorship is increasing, how do you fund independent journalism? To discuss that today, we have a great panel with us. We have Badr Alam, who is the editor of Sujak. Sujak is a non-profit independent news organization that is based in Pakistan. They focus on stories that are overlooked by mainstream media, and their aim is to focus on marginalized voices or voices from the margin. We also have with us Dilrukshi. Dilrukshi is the executive director for the Center for Investigative Reporting in Sri Lanka, and we're very grateful that Dilrukshi is joining us today, given everything that is happening in Sri Lanka at the moment, to take out the time and be a part of a conversation like this. She is a multiple award-winning journalist. She has over 25 experience of journalism experience, and her work has appeared in a wide range of outlets, including The Guardian, Al Jazeera, and Reuters. We also have with us Sunil. Sunil is the Chief Executive Officer at the Independent and Public Spirited Media Foundation that provides funding to organizations, and their aim is to create more public interest journalism and fund organizations that are also doing work that is of public interest. We also have with us Munize Jahangir. Munize is the co-founder and editor of an independent media organization in Pakistan called Voice PK. They focus specifically on watchdog journalism, human rights violations in the country. Munize also has a lot of experience in journalism, and she's also the host of a current affairs show called Spotlight with Munize Jahangir. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of our panel here today and taking out time despite the various issues that are occurring in our countries. Munize, let's go to you. Let's talk about Voice a little bit. What was the purpose of starting an independent media organization? What is the agenda? Like, what is the purpose behind it? What is sort of your vision for the organization itself?
Well, I've been working as a journalist since 2004, and it's basically been in mainstream media in India and in Pakistan. But what we started noticing when we began reporting is that when we used to report, it used to be about people's stories. And slowly and steadily all across South Asia, in fact, I think even in the Western media, it became about statement journalism. And the story of the people was lost. So myself and a couple of other journalists, Zari, one of them who's also part of this webinar, and she's one of the listeners, and a couple of other journalists, we got together and we formed voicepk.net, also to support AGHS Legal Aid Cell, which is a pro bono legal aid, all-female legal aid firm, which began in the 1980s by my mother, Asma Jahangir. who was one of the co-founders. And we wanted to give the victims of violence, women, children, minorities, a voice, because we noticed that the victims who came to us, when their plight was highlighted by the media and they suddenly found a voice, that the law enforcement agencies noticed them. And when we would go with them to lodge an FIR, in some cases, we would not even be allowed to, we would not be able to lodge an FIR for months. But when the situation, when that woman or that child or that minority was caught on a camera and there was an involvement of the media, they suddenly had a voice, and suddenly law enforcement agencies reacted to them very differently. So it was an organic mix basically between what lawyers were doing and what journalists were doing. And we were both focusing on human rights issues across Pakistan and helping people who were suffering from, violence, etc., and providing them legal aid. So all of that happened very organically because we are housed in the same building. And therefore, the young lawyers, all of them in their 20s and 30s, started working together. So I think that was why we started it, because we wanted to tell the story of the people of Pakistan and the people of South Asia. And then it began, and then it became organically into this portal where we would not just be telling the story, but also advocating in the National Assembly and the Senate, in Pakistan's parliament, with policymakers, with law enforcement agencies, and trying to give a voice to some of the people who came to us.
Thank you for the introduction, Manize. Okay, so Dilrukshi, would you sort of speak a little bit about your organization and what was the thought behind forming something like it?
Thank you for having me. It's really good to connect with everyone. So the Center for Investigative Reporting was officially set up in the latter part of 2018. We are really brand new, like we don't count many years, but it was coming for a long time. We've been thinking about it. Many of us have practiced as investigative journalists individually within mainstream legacy media houses, and it's common to the region that the shifts in the political shifts and the situation, the economic pressure, all of that does impact the general storytelling and how newsrooms are run. So there was a time when the political pressures are so high, and eventually we moved out of mainstream as well. And we spent some time thinking about developing a model where we can overcome several difficulties. One is the kind of political pressure that can come through your newsroom itself, the pressures of the masters. And the second thing is also about, there are a lot, we wanted to not just work within a newsroom where you work with a group of journalists, but we also wanted to work with any number of journalists who are working for multiple organizations. So it seemed that, and we used to be trainers, and many people used to come and get trained by us. Whenever we were training for other organizations, they would actually come up with a request for setting up an organization. So I would say that we were being responsive. We were also ready at that time. So we decided to set up the Center for Investigative Reporting. So we also understood by working with journalists that this is not to say that there is bad journalism in Sri Lanka, but there are opportunities within the mainstream for people to do investigative journalism, and there is good journalism happening still in certain places, and there are brilliant journalists still in Sri Lanka. But you also need to have a dedicated space, we felt, where anybody can come and anybody can get mentored. And in any country, there are people who have access to knowledge and technology, and then you also have people who don't have that access. So we wanted to create a place where anybody was free to come, and if you wanted to get trained, we started running courses which were very popular. Our courses are pretty popular, the trainings are popular. So we would definitely ask anyone who wants to work with us in terms of developing stories to come through that channel, get your basics right, and then we do stories, and we do not compete. We support media houses, we work with others.
Thank you, Dilrukshi, for that introduction. Badr, if your internet is working now, could we hear from you for a little bit?
Yes, I'm really sorry for all the interruptions. We are having a massive power failure right now. and I am on a backup power supply at the moment. So the internet is still very unstable. So just to briefly introduce Lok Sujag to everyone, we are a very new organization. The current website of loksujag.com came into being only last year, in the middle of last year. And but the people working with Lok Sujag, or the founders of the Lok Sujag, including myself and Tahir Mehdi, are not really very young people. I am in my 50s, Tahir is in his early 60s. So in that sense, we are an exception to the rule of the startups that we're not young. But we have learned our lessons by working in the mainstream media for a very long time. My last job was as the editor of Adult magazine, which got shut down in July of 2019. And when that got shut down, we started thinking of setting up an independent media outlet which can cover things that mainstream media does not cover. As I was saying earlier, our focus is on the voices from the margins of power. We cover people living on the periphery of the power in Pakistan. We also cover ideas and communities and people who are generally neglected and overlooked in the mainstream media. So, but we do not do it by writing opinion pieces or writing commentary about them or doing sort of interviews or feature videos about them. We try to do investigative reports about the people living in the far-flung remote areas of the country. And that is what our main focus is. So in other words, we are trying to do investigative reporting from the margins of power, so that the voices of the people who are living at those margins can be taken to the policy circles, and the policy circles are then made to heard those voices because of the force of the reporting that those stories include. And we are also trying to do all of this in a narrative style kind of a journalism, not in a news report kind of journalism, so that we can engage the interest of the readers, because we found out that news reports in the age of television and in the age of Twitter and Facebook do not really have much shelf value. So you have to have a narrative style in order to engage your readers in a permanent way, in a more stable way. So that is where we come from. I'm really sorry about all the interruptions also.
Thank you, Badr, for the introduction. Okay, Sunil, we'd like to come to you now because you work more on the funding side of things, right, with your organization. So what sort of has been your experience? And also, what was the idea of forming an organization like yours in India? If you could speak about that to begin with.
Yes. Hi, thanks for having me over, Amel. It's good to be on this panel. This foundation was started almost about somewhere in 2015-16, so almost about 7 or 8 years that we are in existence now. The whole objective then really was from the perspective that mainstream media, some of the points that Dilrukshi has mentioned and Badr has talked about, mainstream media was perhaps constrained from covering issues that did not make sense for them from the point of view of TRPs or circulation growth and things like that. So there was an issue of trust, I think, in media, which was there. And simultaneously with all these issues that were there, the internet online news media had begun to emerge as a force where quite a few young startups began to come about in 2016, 15, 16 onwards. And the foundation realized that if these organizations need to survive, and because the internet model was fairly had not yet developed to that extent, where advertising and revenues of subscription revenues had not yet emerged as strongly as perhaps they are to some extent today. The foundation felt that we need to look at helping or matching the efforts of some of these people who practice good journalism, those who were there in terms of looking at the journalism from the point of view of saying truth to power, or looking at it purely from the perspective of independent journalism covering issues that mainstream media would not want to touch. So we had to, we decided that these entities need to be supported. There were also the background was really that there was a group of philanthropists, and there are quite a few of them now in India who felt that one needed to rebuild trust in media, and they support us. So the funding from this foundation that goes to, in turn, to support online news media works on a model which is a sustainability model. We fund them for a few years till they are in a position to be able to break even and be sustainable from a long-term point of view.
Thank you, Sunil, for that introduction. Sunil, we're going to stay with you for a bit to sort of talk about, so at what stage does a media organization ask for funding? Do they come to you and pitch ideas, or like you said, are there, do the startups already exist, and then sort of you intervene at a point to help them with their financial models?
See, it's important for us to know, even our name suggests that, Independent and Public Spirited Media Foundation. And so the kind of journalism that these entities practice is something that we are keen to understand. And therefore, we do not fund anyone who come to us with ideas and do initial pitching. So it's not seed funding as much as we would need a proof of the concept, or even going beyond that proof of concept to actually be able to have a website, display their content. We know what stories they are doing. We would like to evaluate them on the basis of their journalism. So journalism is one primary reason why we would want to fund them, but also the sustainability part. To what extent this operation is in a position, looks at their effort from a business point of view, because it's very easy to get onto the net, put your stories on, but to do it in a sustainable way, to make it, to break even and make it a profitable enterprise, that's an important criteria. So we look at how effective they are in terms of looking at that even from a revenue point of view and from the point of view of growth of traffic. How do they go about building their audiences? So all of these three major factors is what we look at before we decide to fund them.
Right. So we're going to talk a bit more about sustainability, economic sustainability specifically later on in the webinar. But Dilrukshi, since you're a relatively newer organization, I would also like to speak to you about, because the purpose is to educate our audience here, right? When did you, as a founder, go out and start looking for funding? And the three criteria, which is journalism, growth of traffic, and sustainability, that Sunil has mentioned, are these? Did you already have a website up and running? Like, at what point did you start going out and looking for funding, and what did that funding look like initially?
So when we set up the organization, we have not started even going to funders. Some of the other centers, people who were already working at centers and running centers said, you feel very strongly about it, go set it up. And that's exactly what we did. And we set it up, and we had this very small, very simple launch ceremony. I would only say that the founders themselves had credibility and were accepted as journalists. And this is not to say that that was the only thing, but people approached us, said that this is so necessary for Sri Lanka. So I think it also was set up at a time, Amel, that the country felt a need for, muckraking to take a different turn. And what are the models you've seen? So whenever we started talking to donors, they were looking at the models that we have already seen. The models, existing models in Sri Lanka were, you have these units, located within mainstream, in the mainstream newsroom. So you have investigative journalism desks, but this doesn't provide for collaborations, within organizations or among journalists. So for us, the model was to be that, and that I think worked a lot. A lot of people like the fact that we were going to do collaborations across media and among a group within the community of journalists, and also to undertake South Asia. But as you know, as South Asian work, so we had two funders. The first one, the first bit of support came for fact checking. That's very interesting. This is the other thing. I think we are dealing with a lot of misinformation and disinformation. 10 years ago, when I was really a practicing investigative journalist, I wouldn't have said that we would have thought about these things. But fact checks have become a big revenue model for a lot of people, a lot of organizations. And I see that, and I'm consistently asked for support to set up those. So we had donors, of course, international donors, the same people that everybody works with probably, and also local donors. I think that's important. You also have within each of our communities. So Sunil is a case in point. Now, if we had organizations like yours in Sri Lanka, we're going to be, a lot lucky. We're going to be pretty lucky about having such an organization. So local organizations, because you can also work with thematic areas. So we chose themes to work in the area of information literacy, to work on health and environment, and that was really important. And our model also means that we are not going to claim credit for the content we do. We are not running a platform yet. We would want the journalists to bear credit for what they did and the organization that provides them the platform, and that's perfectly fine for us. We simply collaborate, and for perhaps our luck, this model has worked. So far, people have felt that approach of not being competitive for that larger piece of the pie, and securing your funding alone instead of sharing it and creating a model that shares it. So that has worked well for us so far. And also cross funding. You can work on a theme. And you can also have a couple of organizations supporting that, right? So then it also creates a space for organizations and even individuals. Not that it has happened so far, but I'm hearing this a lot. People are willing to give you $1,000 than like $20,000 in one go. But you have to create that space for people to make donations. CIR has so far not had donations, and we have not even promoted that because we are currently donor funded. But we see that as with the expansion and continuity of work, people are happy to invest in things that they like. And I think Sunil said it right. And at a point when we were setting up, I remember the GIJN core team also gave me one bit of advice. You're running a business. Just don't think about it in any other way. You're definitely doing it for journalism, but there is a business side to it. And if you were just going to close your eyes to that, you're not going to have sustainability. And it's important to understand, what do they fund for? Who funds what is important to us. So there are people organizations and individuals who want to support human rights and grand corruption, systemic corruption, and health and environment. So we have been talking to them across those themes. So that's how we have worked.
Okay, so what I heard, Rukshi, is you're saying that you're donor funded at the moment, and also when you look to expand, you're looking at collaborations across local newsrooms and also international newsrooms. So when you talk about cross collaborations that might be funded, are you looking at international collaborations?
I'm looking at both, and we have already done both. As I said, Amal, we do not run our banner saying CIR funded this kind of thing. We don't. And I also think it gives a certain sense of cover also. It protects the people who actually work on those stories as well. And we have done international collaborations. And as I mentioned, those themes are the ones where we have been strongest, because there was a pandemic. And when journalists wanted to really do investigative stories and the organizations did not invest in them, we introduced a fellowship scheme. And through the fellowship scheme, but we just don't give money. You have to come through that, you have to apply for a fellowship, you have to get selected, you also have to go through a couple of webinars of orientations, and then you can go on fellowship. And you have a support system, you have experts supporting you to by way of mentorship. So that's how we do. And also publications, I think that's really important. When we support local journalists who want to do their stories, we're very happy to support them to do their stories and support them to just do the story the way they want. We support financially and with mentorship in improving the story. And just early part of this year and last year, we also kind of came into arrangements with some of the international publications and organizations to do collaborations. Our next step definitely is to do South Asian collaborations. We have done it, bilaterally. It's time to do it with the multiple countries.
That sounds great, the Rikshi collaborations across South Asia. Okay, so Badr, could you speak a little bit about Sujag? I know that Sujag, first, what was your initial round of funding? What did the organization look like, and how have you restructured it since? But also, I know that you're experimenting with a membership subscriber-based model. What does that look like for you?
Thank you, Amal. Sujag, as a non-governmental organization, has a long history. It came into being in 1997, and it has been doing a lot of work in the development sector. And it continued to exist as a very functional NGO in Pakistan until 2018 and 2019. But then in 2019, we decided to convert it into a news media organization. And at that stage, Sujag had a pool of money that it had saved through its previous activities. So that money was kind of a seed money for the news media organization that we were planning to set up. But there were a number of hurdles that we were facing at that time. Number one was that the government was not very kind towards NGOs at that time. The NGOs across Pakistan were shutting up, and then there was a massive crackdown on the donor-funded projects and programs. So we thought that if we continue to exist as an NGO, that kind of regulatory regime might kill us even before we are born. So we decided to set up a company jointly owned by myself and my co-founder Tahir Mehdi. So now we are a corporate entity registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan. But the seed money that Sujag had saved from its previous activities came in very handy for us to pass through that transition, and it has helped us survive until December of 2021. So until that period, we did not have any worries about money, but at the same time, we were also thinking about launching the membership model that you have rightly pointed out. We think that engaging people with your content, with your work is very important in a country like Pakistan, where crackdown on journalists and censorship policies of the government often, treat the media organizations very, very badly. So you need a community, a group of people, a sort of cohort of people who can support you, not just in terms of giving you money for your operations, but also if and when the government cracks down on you, they're willing to go out in the streets and chant slogans in favor of you. So that kind of idea was the reason that we started thinking about the membership model. Unfortunately, we have not yet rolled out the membership model, and right now we are surviving on two other sources of revenue. One is doing some production work for different clients. So we produce videos for them or edit contents for them, and then they pay us, and from those savings we try to run logsujag.com, and we also have a grant from a foreign donor. But our ultimate objective is that we go for the membership model. We have already started asking people to become the members of Lok Sujag by sending them newsletters, by having incorporated a page on our website where people can register as members. And right now, we're not asking them to do anything. We're just asking them to engage with our content, comment our content, rate our content, let us know what they like, what they don't, what is it that they would like us to cover, what is it that that is not being covered in their respective area, and Sujag can cover because other organizations will not. So we have started that window recently, and that is a very nascent, very kind of fledgling window at this moment. But we are hoping that in the coming months and in the coming years, membership will be our main source of revenue. And people who become members, they will not be donating or they'll not be subscribing, but they will be sort of a community that thinks that this is a journalism that they need to support. This is a journalism that is bringing some value to the information that they require, or this is the journalism that is taking their voices to the power corridor. So as a result of all these perceptions, they support this journalism. So it's not a subscription model per se, but it's a subscription plus kind of a model in which the members also engage very, very regularly and very, very strongly with the newsroom. So that is what we are trying to do in Pakistan.
Thank you, Badr. So I think the theme that I hear there is that you're trying to build a community that will also then financially support the kind of journalism that you're doing. Maniza, I'll turn to you now, because Voice is a completely open, free to the public platform. And from what you spoke earlier, it seems like that is the idea behind it, right? To like take these marginalized voices to the larger public. In an era where everybody is now almost paywalling, how do you look at an operation like Voice? Like, what does your funding look like at the moment, and where do you hope to take it?
Well, I think that it's very difficult, as you've heard from other people as well, to keep things like this alive financially. And we are constantly looking for funding. We are looking for, we deal with very, very small amounts of funds. It's not that big, but what we do is that we keep on looking for, we have one person just looking for funding. I myself have a full-time job. I'm a TV broadcast journalist at a mainstream TV station, so it's tough for us, and all of us who are seniors who are working, we are not really paid. Obviously, it's it's a struggle to keep it alive. But there are small funds. These days, especially with the Ukraine crisis, the focus remains not in Pakistan, and obviously there's been a drain. And you will find very few funding sources which will say that, okay, we are wanting to fund a news website or a current affairs website. So they are more focused towards advocacy, which is what we do actually primarily now, which is advocacy. But I've also realized that the backbone of any good media outlet, is actually daily news. Because till you are not checking daily news, then you do not know exactly what is happening in the country. And you cannot follow trends. You cannot follow what is happening on a daily basis. So we have a bulletin. We have a human rights bulletin, which is the first of its kind in Pakistan. And during the COVID, we had also a COVID bulletin, So from those bulletins and everyday news is when we find stories. So I think it's important to have that structure of a newsroom. That's very important, because that becomes the backbone, and then you take out of it what you need. So yes, it's been a big challenge to fund Voice PK. However, there are programs, there are funding opportunities. They're small and they're very focused. So I think because we are working in the area of women, children, minorities, there is an opportunity there to tap into that funding.
So from what I understand, you're saying is that you're also primarily looking at international donors, but also very focused international grants, maybe that are human rights oriented, that you then use for the organization also.
See, we learned from our mother organization, from AGHS Legal Aid Cell, that in Pakistan, usually people only fund madrasas and hospitals. They do not have the concept of funding even women who will need legal aid, what very poor, even not who need legal aid. Now, for the first time, the state talks about giving legal aid to women who need it. But this is a recognition of that need after a very, very long time, when women have needed it for decades. For the first time, the state has recognized it. So I think that states like ours, which are not completely democratic, it takes them time. And it's a process where they come to a conclusion that this is what our citizens need. And I think that we are filling those holes, those gaps. Similarly, with our population, when they talk about charity work, they will, give a lot of food to the same mosque, same madrasa, same, but they will not be creative with how they want it. They will not think about charity. It's one thing to just throw money, but it's another thing to actually think about where your money is going and how it will help people. So I think that we are not there yet. Yes, we give a lot of money away for charity, but it is the same organizations that are getting it, and in the same fields that are getting it. So you will not find a charity that is, very few will you will find working for women's rights. You won't. So I think Pakistan that way has a long way to go before it realizes exactly what people need in this country, whether there are children, whether there are women, whether there are minorities, whether they're marginalized communities. It's going to take some time.
Thank you, Munize. So I think what Munize was also speaking to, Sunil, will come to you. And what Badr and Dilrukshi also spoke about was the importance of, well, yes, we're all relying on international donors at the moment, but also the importance of creating local funds, which is the kind of work that, Sunil, your organization does, right? So first, two things if you could speak to. Firstly, like, is local funding in the way that your organization does, do you think it's a more sustainable model than relying simply on donor-driven international funds? And secondly, clearly there is something different happening in India that is not happening in Sri Lanka or Pakistan or other countries of South Asia. What do you think the main difference is, if you could comment on that? Sunil, I think your mic is muted.
Yes. This foundation, we do not have any international collaboration for funding. We do not have any international donors. In fact, media in India cannot rather look at any kind of donor funding from international organizations. For that, there is a huge process, and that is, I think, in a way forbidden in the country. So the funding that we have is completely locally generated. It is from Indian philanthropists across the country. And that is what we use to fund the online news media who apply to us. So we have been in the scenario now, as I mentioned, for more than 5-6 years. And we have almost over 40 organizations have benefited from this foundation's funding. And a lot of that is to organizations across different genres of journalism, whether they are in the community space or political and news analysis and opinion kind of news sites, or whether they are very niche sites in the legal space or in fake news, even in the environment space. So we kind of identify different genres and try and fill in those gaps. We also look at the underserved areas in the country, whether it is the northeast of India or even in Kashmir. We have funded entities who are practicing independent journalism there.
Right, and when it comes to the sustainability of sort of checking how sustainable this organization economically is, what are some of the factors that you're looking at? Are you just looking at the mindset that these journalists are coming in with? Is it a business-oriented mindset, or are you looking at diverse revenue streams, or how many people visit the website? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yes, all of these factors are important. At the core of it is the journalism they practice, which is extremely important. And along with that, we definitely evaluate them on how they've gone about looking at the business. So whether they have been in a position to set it up as an organization, do they have a team which is there, or are they just lone rangers? We have not funded anybody who comes in saying that they have set up a website and they have friends who contribute to it, and that's how they are right now going about. So we don't fund those kind of organizations as much as those which have been led by entrepreneurial journalists who have shown leadership. So leadership is a very important criteria, that they will be in a position to manage and build a team, their ability to handle finances, their ability to handle the revenues side. When I say ability to handle revenue and finances, they should be able to appreciate that at least, and be in a position to have somebody focusing on that. So all of these factors are extremely important for us to be able to look at them for funding. And the process is such that we believe that organizations today, if they have to be sustainable from a long-term point of view, revenues are not going to come easy in the internet space. It is going to be a challenge. And whether to look in at revenues coming in from advertising or subscriptions, it's not so easy to build. So they will require time. So we fund organizations for about 3 years. The first year we fund them, and all of this is a matching grant. So we look at what are their current revenues and what is the extent of scaling up that they would like to do. And we evaluate them. There's a fair amount of due diligence that goes on in this process. And once we have determined that this organization can look at scaling up, then in the first year, we would match their funding almost to the tune of about 50 to 60%. So they would then be in a position to really move much faster than what they would if they were going it alone, and scale up much faster. The second year, our level of involvement goes lower. We expect them to increase their revenues, and similarly on a third year. So it is like a depleting involvement that we have with the organization. And by the fourth year, we expect the entity to stand up on its own to break even. And it's not that they always break even. By fourth year also, they perhaps could be struggling, but that gap is brought down to at least about 15-20%. They are, by that time, have built a team, are a little more sustainable, and we also guide them along the way to look at other revenue streams. And so during the 3-year phase, we guide them on looking at different models that are there today. And one of the major things is reader revenues. We believe today readers are willing to pay for content that they believe in, content that they trust. And to that extent, advertising has become less of a component in their overall revenue stream. It is slowly being taken over by subscriptions, by reader donations, the membership fee, which membership also, which Badr talked about. There also you could generate revenues. So, and social media. We find increasingly most of our grantees today are present even on social media through YouTube, through Facebook, through Instagram, and we encourage them so that their reach increases, and that ensures that they are able to build in a fair amount of audiences, which can then be monetized for revenues. And so they are a fair chunk of them have a very strong presence through their YouTube channels, and that's a good revenue stream. Reader donations has, over the last 4 or 5 years, I would say, has improved tremendously for most of our grantees, where readers, where that component has substantially increased. And I would say today, for the success of any of these online media entities, it's important that they look at reader revenues more than they would look at advertising.
Thank you, Sunil. That's some really good insight. So I think one of the things that Sunil also mentioned is the criteria that his organization maybe looks at what a good, sustainable, successful journalism organization would look like. Dilrukshi, in your understanding of how do you measure your own sustainability and your own success and growth as an organization? Are you looking at the amount of journalists you're coming at? If they're increasing, is that a success in your book? Or are you looking at the clicks that you get on your website? Like, how do you measure success and growth?
I think our metrics are really different, and possibly we are a little fortunate as well, perhaps, because the frequency of daily, developing stories is not our thing. We are not a news website. We're not running a news operation. So investigative stories will take time. So that's a two-way street, Amal, I think, at least in this country with a small media market that we have. We have selected the option of working with media houses and journalists who want to come to us and work with us, and also to collaborate and develop our own content. So what is success to us? It is definitely one way of measuring our success is the kind of people we draw towards organization who want to be trained, who want to collaborate on stories. There are at least a few journalists today who are consistently working on thematic issues, but they are not out there to be seen. They have been working on these stories for a number of months, so that initiative needs to be supported, and to make those connections, and to be able to work with watchdog organizations, to organizations with great expertise who would come and help us to develop stories. So that's one. And of course, if you look at the analytics, it's really good to have certain stories, to find certain stories doing well. One of our environmental investigations had something like over 600,000 clicks. So that's really great. But I also think it's also about choosing the platform. That was also because of the placement. If you publish it in a local newspaper or a website, that probably may not have that same impact. So we definitely appreciate the fact that people want to read that kind of content. So success is also the kind of collaborations we get. And when I say collaborations, and that is also individuals, organizations, and also platforms. We are right now in the process of working with multiple platforms, international platforms also, particularly, to make sure that the stories can be placed, the story can be accessed by a much wider audience. So if you produce content in the local language, then you will have to probably translate. So that is one. And also outcomes. For any investigative report, it's not about the promotion. It's not about the paid advertisement that you run to promote the story. It is about the follow-ups and the kind of ground level impact your story actually will show. And just to give a simple example, when we did a data-driven story sometime back, and that resulted in a ministry correcting its data set that is there on their public website. So I think that's outcome. Those are outcomes that investigative journalists can actually treasure, because it's not about the money, it's not about the clicks, it's really not just only about the views. It's about your audience, your engagement, and how far you reach and the impact you create. So for me, the metrics are very different.
Right, and I would like to pose the same question, Badr, to you. Like, what does success look like? How do you measure growth? How do you measure success at Sajak?
I totally agree with Dilrukshi. I think the best matrix for engaging your success is engagement. How successfully do you engage with your audience in a strong, sustainable manner that they are willing to put their money in your effort, in your story. So that, I think, is the biggest measure. And I think that is not very easy, as Munize has rightly pointed out. People in Pakistan are not really very fond of funding independent news media organizations. Perhaps there is no news media organization right now which is being funded by people across Pakistan. So this is an experiment against the kind of grain of the circumstances. So it's not easy, but I think this is the only way of being sustainable in the foreseeable future or in the long term. Otherwise, you can get grants now, but tomorrow the grants might dry up because of the national and international situations, or you might tire of doing what the grant making organizations want you to do. They always have certain kind of stories that they want to push rather than other stories that you would want to do. So that conflict also starts developing at some stage or the other. Similarly, there are other revenue streams like the one that we are trying right now of producing content for others and trying to make money out of that. That is also very, very labor intensive. You cannot find a lot of time for that. You cannot always find the human resources to do that. So engagement is not just the metric for success for us. It's also the matrix that can eventually be the source for stability and sustainability for the organization.
Thank you, Badr. Maniji, the same question to you. Like, what does success look like? What does growth look like? What does success look like for you guys at Voice? Okay, I'm not sure. Okay.
Sorry, yeah. So the question really is, what does success look like for you, for us?
Yes.
Well, for us, we are also a new organization. We only began in late 2019. So we haven't had that much time. But for us, what success looks like is, for instance, I'll give you one example. We've been very lucky in the sense that the victims that have come to us and some stories that we have found, we have developed advocacy work around that. So in one case, we had this one Farah Shaheen, a minor girl. She was picked up, she was from Faisalabad, and she was picked up by, she was a Christian girl. She was picked up by this, it was a gang almost, and extremists. They were fundamentalists. And she was forcibly converted to Islam and then married off to an older man, 50 years old. And when our reporters went there, they realized that she was actually kept as a slave in their house. So we did a story on it. And at that time, our lawyers were shooed away. When they went to lodge an FIR, the father was told, "Aren't you happy that your daughter has now been converted to Islam, that she's become Muslim?" And, he was abused literally. So when we did the story, at that time, the Senate chairman, Mustafa Nawaz Khokar, read the story. And he said to me that, we are going to summon the IG and ask him why they are not lodging the FIR. The FIR was lodged as a result. The IG was called and the girl was produced before a magistrate. And then there was a DNA test to determine her age. And it obviously turned out that she was a minor. And at that time, it was very difficult for us because they were saying, "Oh, she's converted to Islam." So we said, yes, she may have converted to Islam, but that does not mean she cannot go back to her parents, her father. So the girl was actually ordered to be sent back to her father and she was repatriated. That is the first real big success story for us that happened. Then in another case, there was a honor killing of a young woman. And it was a horrible case. The girl was buried alive with her newborn child, literally, by her own father and brother. And nobody would lodge an FIR in that case either. So we did a story, and one of the PTI lawmakers read the story. And she contacted us and she said, "What has happened here?" So they then said that the child, we were representing the girl, and then the newborn baby was represented by the state. It never really happened. They never really followed through. They made a statement at that time, but they never really gave counsel to the little baby. So anyway, we ended up representing both the mother and the child. And in that case, at least the case moved forward. So in our cases, now these are just two examples that I've given, but in our cases, especially in the students' cases, we've done stories on students who've been picked up, who've been enforced disappearances. We've done stories on that, and mainstream media picked those up. So we managed to generate a debate about it, especially about the sedition law. So I think in that way, we have been luckily we've been very successful with our advocacy because we've married the media part with advocacy and with legal aid. So, and we have had success from across political parties because they've realized that what we're doing is, genuinely reaching out to victims of violence. So I think that there are takers. When you do speak, when you do engage with politicians, they will engage with you and they will try and help out. There is a genuine desire to see things improve. But unfortunately, if these are individual cases, but if you look at the broad spectrum of what is happening in Pakistan, the laws that have been made, there has been no structure to implement them. And that is why we can say 1, 2, 3, but actually we can't really, unless, and we've brought in policymakers on webinars to say, look, you are making laws, but what about the structure? You have to build that structure to implement those laws. But I think for them, it is, oh, you're given some accolades because you make that law, and it's a good thing. I'm glad that they're making those laws, but they're not really thinking about how to implement them. And they're not even putting funding aside to implement them, which is very worrisome.
Thank you, Manise. I mean, I think what you're saying ultimately is that you look at the impact that your stories also produce, especially in terms of policy and in terms of the advocacy work that you do. Okay, since we're going towards the end of the webinar, we have a couple of questions that I would like to take. So Neil, there's one question that's specifically for you, where somebody wants to know if they don't have initial funding, how and to even set up an organization, how do they approach an organization like yours to be able to get that funding or to start setting something up?
The question is that they don't have any funding initially.
For journalists who have no money to even set up something like a small newsroom, where do they go? And I think that is quite a popular question that we're getting here.
Yeah, it is a very popular question. We have quite a few journalists, individual journalists who come say that we would like to start and this is what we would want to do. Can you fund us? No, see, as an organization, we are looking at, apart from journalism and journalism with impact, we are also looking at a long-term sustainability. And when we are talking about sustainability, our entire approach is like that of an investor. Our funding is completely philanthropic funding. We don't take any equity from any organization, but we would expect them to be sustainable from a long-term point of view, so that we have had issues with individuals. We have tried this model. Somebody who had, because the cost of entry into the internet space is very low. Entry barriers are extremely low. Anyone can get into that space. So we have tried this model with a couple of people, but we have not succeeded because they are not in a position to look at the other aspects of the business. So when we have now focused on institution building, we would like our success really will be measured both from the impact of the journalism today, as well as after we have stopped funding, if we would want them to be still around 10 years later. And that is when we would say, yes, our funding has helped this organization come up and it is a force to reckon with. In terms of impact, in fact, the entities that we support today in India, if you really look at their traffic and the audience reach that they have been able to generate, it would be extremely small compared to most of the mainstream media websites in the online space. Yet they are a very powerful voice. Their share of voice is so large that they in fact set the agenda for mainstream media on various issues. And that is something which we are proud of today, of what our grantees have been able to do in that space. So individuals is something which we have not yet really tried.
Thank you, Steve. So another question that I think is open to all panelists to answer is, especially the editors that we have over here, is how do you sort of, especially when an operation grows larger and you get more and more donors or funding, sources of funding coming in, how do you maintain transparency? Because on the one hand, you have to survive, right? So how picky can you be about who you're choosing to get money from? And also, how do you ensure transparency with funding then? So Dilrukshi, we can start with you.
Amal, we haven't had a lot of donors, so that's one thing. And you're right about the transparency question, but I think if anybody wants that kind of information, we should be able to share that information irrespective of the consequences. We all live in very difficult times, but there are multiple risks that ride with that. But that information, the organizations do understand when they choose to, support organizations like ours. Investing in investigative journalism for a donor can also be high risk, and we understand that. But in terms of transparency, so you can actually request for that kind of information. And also our growth within 1 year, suddenly, that reminded me of what happened at CIR. When we started, we had nothing. In 1 year, it suddenly had multiple, programs to run. And we make a commitment to thematic areas. And then those who work and contribute to the development of that theme, people will know it's a small market, it's a small space, small donor community. It's very obvious, and we do not conceal that. So also, when you visit a website, you can see who supports what, right? We also get a lot of flack for that kind of information sharing, for the kind of transparency in terms of, identifying certain donors, because some don't like who, support organizations. So that is all that happens. But I just wanted to add something, if you don't mind, and that's about, a lot of people think you had to fundraise just from the point of, your organization only, and I think Sunil might agree, but you can actually fundraise as a collective. There are people who push proposals, you take little chunk. There are areas that are dedicated to investigative journalism. Nobody funds investigative journalism per se. Nobody does that. So you have to kind of give a proposal that is more rounded. It has multiple aspects, to training, to research, to stories that you produce. And as he said, sustainability, you have to pay bills, you have to pay for the members who are running that operation. So to do that, there is nothing to say that I want that whole pie, it's mine. But I think that a part of the success is also in working with others, like-minded others, to make sure that you have the bigger program, but we take that investigative journalism component, and we're very happy with that.
Right, thank you, Dilrukshi. I think that also answers the question that if you're an individual looking for funding, then maybe look to opportunities where you can collaborate with others to sort of build that platform. But then I think you might also have something to speak about transparency at Sujak. Like, how do you continue to grow financially as an organization and then also maintain financial transparency?
I think that is another challenge that the startups like us always face. Let's be very clear about it. No money that anyone gives you, whether they are an investor, whether they are a lender, whether they are a donor, whether they are your readers, no one will give you money without any expectations or without any conditionalities or without any strings. If the reader gives you money, they will have certain expectations from the kind of journalism that you do. If a grant making organizations gives you money, they will have their own mandate within which that grant will be then treated and considered. If an investor gives you money, they will always consider the potential for growth and potential for profits in your venture. And if an individual donor or individual donations are given to you, they are always based on the kind of journalism you do or the kind of issues that you raise. So no money that you will ever get will be like dished very freely on a platter to you. You will have to work for it and work with it. So that is where your first dilemma comes in: what kind of money you will accept and what kind of money you will not accept. What kind of money will hamper your growth in the long run, what kind of money will help your growth in the long run, and what kind of grants you can take which help you focus on your own niche area of journalism and what kind of grants can divert you from that. So these are the challenges and these are the questions that every new media organization has to really focus on. But having said that, I think the journalists also need to diversify their skills in the sense that they just not focus on their reporting skills or their editing skills. They also need to learn some management also. They also need to understand handling of finances also. They also need to understand the human resources aspect of it. So unless and until you do all these things together, you forget about taking your platform forward and make it grow in the medium term and in the long term. But having said all of this, I would say this is a proposal or this is an effort for only for the long haul. If you are in it for the next 5 or 10 years, only then you probably will be able to achieve some of the goals that you have set for yourself. But if you are in it for a very short period of time, for 2 or 3 years, and you think that you will survive that period on grants or something like that, maybe that's not a good option at all. Maybe you will not get even those grants that you're aiming for.
Thank you, Badr. That was extremely insightful. We're running out of time. We do have some more questions, but I think we'll stop here. Thank you, everybody, for taking out the time to be a part of this discussion. I hope this was fruitful for the audience listening. I hope everybody had the opportunity to learn something and take something away from it. You can always write to us at GIJN.org or hello@GIJN.org if you have any more questions about this discussion or pertaining to investigative journalism. We're open to answering more questions. We have a bunch of resources for independent journalists who want to maybe start an organization that we can send your way. Thank you. We're going to end here. Please, I'm going to send the website link in the chat for anybody who is interested. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the panelists. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.